Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with Us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with my co-hosts Courtney Staples and Ian Woodworth from the Undercommon Taste podcast. Ian, so good to have you back. It's been quite a while since you've been on our podcast, but I just made a fairly recent appearance on yours. Now, would you want to tell us why I would pop in on your podcast?
Well, because here a little over a month ago, we just had our 100th episode. So we had some past guests and friends of the show come on to just have a bullshit episode where we just sat around and talked. And it was a great bunch of fun. And I'm really super excited to be here, be back on Worldbuild with us. It's been about a year and a half since the last time I was over here. So
it's been a very long time. Yeah, it's been quite a while. But it's great to have you back. And for the newer listeners who might not have gone back, why don't you tell us what your podcast is all about?
So Undercommon Taste is a podcast where we create and discuss homebrew content for tabletop RPGs. Most of our content up to now has been Dungeons and Dragons, focusing towards 5th edition, but a lot of our later episodes involve diving into lore from older editions, primarily 2nd and 3rd edition, and talking about how to take elements of that lore and bring it into a 5th edition game to just sort of flesh out the world. Because Wizards in 5th edition hasn't done a very good job of world building with their settings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they've, from my understanding, they've kind of fallen back on relying on previously established settings quite a bit.
They have.
Yeah. Or even Magic the Gathering, which I have no problem with, as long as they're the good settings, not the bad ones. And you know the difference.
Absolutely, yeah. Even though I haven't played Magic the Gathering for 10 years, I still know that which ones are the good ones and which ones aren't.
Oh, absolutely. It's pretty obvious, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so we also bring on different TTRPG creators, people who do actual play podcasts, people who are game writers and such. Most recently, at the time of recording this, we just had an interview with Cassie, the DM for the Lovely Craftians Call of Cthulhu actual play podcast. They just wrapped up their 4th season, which was a 4-season story arc. So they just wrapped all that up, and it's a great podcast. You should go listen to it. And then our next guest is going to be Goblin Archives, who wrote the game Liminal Horror, which is a hack of Yochai Gall's Cairn, which is in turn a hack of Chris McDowell's Into the Odd, which I think was based on White Hack. I think we're getting very 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon with this game, but we're really excited to be able to talk with them too. So.
Right. And White Hack, of course, being a hack of Dungeons and Dragons, which was, of course, a hack of Chainmail, which was, of course, a hack of the original Napoleonic Minis war game, which was, of course, based on Napoleon Bonaparte. But yes, I think I love how tight knit and how interwoven the tabletop industry is. It is very niche and very insular, and part of that is good and part of that is not so good. But the parts that we're talking about, pretty cool, I would say.
I would agree.
All right. Well, we don't have you on just to chat about bullshit all day, although we could. But more importantly, we have a very special episode and series at that, wherein for the spooky season, rather than just bringing you a single spooky jam, we decided to talk to our patron-only Discord. We have the Aphid Lounge set up in our Discord if you are a patron. And for this year, for this spooky season, we decided to have a little bit of fun with the Discord and get ideas from everyone. It's like a big old gumbo of spooky season prompts and jam, except it's not really jam. It's actually just a setting prompt. And that prompt is: somewhere in a steampunk city sits a church, and beneath that, its labyrinthine catacombs. Whatever unknowable horror lurks within has amassed a following, thanks to its seemingly infinite power of mind and body control. It possesses both its attackers and victims, forcing brutal crimes to be committed, all while those under its control experience everything through a hive mind-like connection. For the tenets we have, for some reason, no one speaks about those moments of control. Old Celtic deities and mythology plays a role of some sort. And Courtney, I don't remember. I don't remember this part, but you added blood fountains. I thought we said no to the blood fountains this time.
Did we? Because it was definitely discussed in the patron chat.
Okay, I feel like you just have blood fountains on the mind, but like, you know what? Blood fountains, tenets, we'll keep it in there. That's not a problem. All of these tenets and all of the content that we're talking about come particularly due to some of our patrons' names that you will probably recognize if you're longtime listeners. One, Gluax Speed, one, Commissar Whiskers, and one, Diploraptor. But before we get into the prompt, I'd like to remind everyone that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com. Click the link, follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, you can always go to our Twitter at Let's Worldbuild. If you want to come join our Discord, where we will talk about spooky stuff well until December and pretty much year round, you can go and follow a link for that in the description of the episode. And of course, if you're feeling particularly generous and you want to give us money over on Patreon, there's a link for that in the description as well, where we offer, the patron-only Discord, for example, early episodes and patron-only episodes as well. And for just a moment, I would like to stop and thank all of our patrons for their continued contribution. We would be able to do it without you, but honestly, like, we really wouldn't be able to do it without you. The sense of community and the support that you show us is truly inspiring. And I, on behalf of World Build With Us, would like to thank all of our patrons for continuing their support. Of course, if you want to join our patrons, we'll be more than happy to take your money. But it's more than that. It's about building a community. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who listens, even if you're not a patron. It really means a lot as we're doing this for our third year. The spooky season is always a particularly special episode for me personally, because I'm a big fan of horror and Halloween in particular. But this is my sappy moment of the year to thank everyone profusely for their support. And with all of the shilling out of the way, we can finally get into our spooky prompt. Now, Ian, as our guest, you have first right.
All right.
So please, what's your tenet, sir?
Well, I'm glad that you decided to let Courtney's blood fountains stand, because my first tenet is plucking the low-hanging fruit and saying that the blood fountains are the physical manifestations of the cosmic entity within our world.
Mm-hmm. I can support that. Sure.
Yeah, I do like that.
Courtney already very excited.
Right away.
Yeah.
And actually, this ties in really, really well to my first tenet as well. Not surprisingly, also blood related.
You are too on brand sometimes, Courtney, I swear.
It was brought up in chat. I had to go
By
with
you. I'm
no,
sure.
I thought it was related to we were talking about Diablo and like the church and the catacombs and blood fountains. And...
I was gonna say, when I read this, it felt very New Tristram.
Yeah. That's,
yes.
Yeah.
I was searching for a GIF of the butcher, but unfortunately they only have the 3 or the Heroes of the Storm version. And I refuse to use those GIFs. So yeah. Fresh meat. Just want to toss it out there. Continue on with your self-insert at this point, tenet. But what do you got for us, Courtney?
Wow. All right.
I'm calling you the fuck out. All right.
Whatever.
You're just mad that the last twist made us do less blood than before. So,
All right. So I had been browsing through some Irish mythology, and one thing that caught my eye, pun partially intended, was Baelor, who had an eye that caused destruction when opened. And then, of course, in the stories, that eye had a tendency to get gouged out by heroes, sometimes to the point of spilling so much blood that lakes were formed from it. So
Mhm.
that got me thinking that the entity that lurks in the catacombs had its mystical eye or some other body part wounded ages ago, and that formed an underground blood lake that's the source of the blood fountains.
Interesting. Interesting. I have a question.
Mhm.
So the blood pools, right? I'm imagining these as like Catholic little basins where you would like put holy water.
Oh,
Is
yeah,
this the
yeah.
type of thing where people will take the blood from the catacombs and bring it up and put it into these basins? Or does the blood manifest like on its own? Or is there
Hmm.
some third thing here?
I almost want it to be like the fonts are like the ends of appendages and it's literally bleeding into them.
Oh. Like it's
Mm.
all connected
Yeah.
underground, and this is just like leaking up, basically.
So it's like some weird macabre interior plumbing.
Right. No, yeah, I
Excellent.
can definitely
Yeah.
fuck with that. Yeah. I mean, of course, now I'm thinking that the tendrils that you're talking about are actually like ocular stalks or like the bits
Ooh.
that like keep the eyeball in place and stuff like that.
Or like that's how it senses stuff. That's how it sees the outside world.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's to borrow from D&D, it's like a beholder that has had the eyes removed from the eye stalks.
Ooh.
Not quite what I had in mind. Imagine like just like the when you have your eye gouged out, you know how there's like the little nerve endings and tendrils that stick out of
Yeah.
it? Just that part, which kind of implies that deep below the catacombs, there is like a monstrous eyeball somewhere.
Hmm.
But like that's just kind of where my brain goes. We don't have to keep that necessarily.
Okay.
Um, so I'm glad that we got the blood fountains out of the way early, but I wanted to appreciate what they are, and then we can never talk about them again.
Wow.
I'm joking. I'm joking, of course. But for my tenant, I actually wanted to keep it fairly simple. And by that, I mean, I wanted to restrict the setting to the church and the catacombs itself. I think that
Hmm.
horror is most effective when it's a claustrophobic environment. And I know that the prompt kind of implies that it's just about the church and the catacombs, but I really want to make sure that that's clear. I want to narrow that down. And on top of that, I want to talk a little bit more about the church. I want the church to be a fairly important place within the city. I want it to be politically important. And I basically want it to be like a nexus for like this church is basically where the rich and the poor and the middle class all come together. So there's a lot of political intrigue that could be happening. And I mean, obviously, there's a bunch of horror as well. So super, super narrow focus, keep it just within the church, but I also want that church to be important. And that's what I want to go with.
Okay. I can definitely see the potential for a lot of tie-in for like giving it almost a Pentecostal feel where you have people, speaking in tongues and rolling in the aisles and that the spirit falls upon them, and the spirit falling upon them would be the entity assuming control of their body.
Oh, that's cool.
Interesting. So it's like allowing it into your body is kind of like a religious rite or something like that. And so like what people might believe is just kind of this act of faith is actually a genuine invitation to some like greater being. So what I think is actually kind of interesting about that is this idea that you're essentially consenting to be controlled, but you don't realize how real and how like invasive it is until later.
Mhm.
Yeah, and you end up questioning after the fact because you're expecting this religious experience. Because if we're going off of a real world church sort of setting, there is the assumption that the church is a good place and that the things that happen in the church are good things because they are associated with that good place. And so whenever they cede control to the entity and do these truly horrific things, and that they are completely aware of the fact that they're doing them and they can remember them after the fact, that's why they don't talk about it, because their brain is trying to rationalize, I was in a good place, good things were supposed to happen, why do I feel so bad about it?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, that it's like taboo almost to bring it up or like to question it, because the sort of cultural mindset is like, this is a good thing. And, we should be grateful that we have this connection. So to question that would be like, why are you bringing this up now? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, we all had this experience and we're fine with it.
Yeah, and there is this kind like there's power in collectivism, right? There's power in community.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so to pervert that power and to pervert that sense of belonging is really powerful and like thematically horrific. I want to go back and quote from one of our patrons, Commissar Whiskers, who in our Discord chat said, "Looking at horror as a genre, it's more about our reactions to a thing, the fear and repulsion of it, rather than pure violence or simply spookiness. So a theme that immediately gives goosebumps makes people uncomfortable." And yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think that what we're doing here is a theme of like its invasiveness and it's like perverting something that should be good. So that thematically, I
Mhm.
think, works with what we're talking about here. And I'm very excited and very happy to see what's going on. So with that, let's loop it back around. We're going to go to our second tenet. Ian, what's your
Yeah.
second tenet?
All right. Well, I wanted to bring this back and tie it back into the Celtic mythology because we haven't done a whole lot with that.
Mhm.
My second tenet is that wearing woad makes you invulnerable to the entity's mind control.
Mhm.
Okay. For those of us who don't know what woad is, I would like a clarification, please.
All right. So if you've seen the pictures, the illustrations of Celtic peoples or read depictions, they often, especially in a battle context, are painted with this blue paint.
Mm-hmm.
And woad is the blue pigment that was used for making this paint. It was primarily used as a dye for like fabrics and stuff, but they could mix it in a certain way to use it as a body paint. There are a lot of misconceptions about it that, wearing it would be like a psychotropic effect, and they found that the effects of that are very minimal to
Mm.
non-existent, or that it would act as sort of a numbing agent or put them into a battle frenzy or something like that, and all of those have been thoroughly debunked. But there was a cultural significance to painting yourself with woad for the Celtic and Pictish people whenever they would enter battle. And so I wanted to tie back to the Celtic gods and say that perhaps, the agents of these gods would know this and they would be able to paint themselves with the woad in order to do battle with the enemy
Mm.
without worrying about losing control to the enemy.
Mhm.
Can I kind of pick at that a little bit, Ian?
Sure. Yeah.
So here's actually what I'm thinking. I would like to decouple the idea of it being from the gods. Like the reason that the woad is effective is not related to it being divine. There's another reason for it that I don't think we need to explore, but I would just like this idea that like that it's not religious necessarily, or the reason is incidental as to why it like protects people from this mind altering kind of influence.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. It's just I was trying to draw back to the real world Celtic
Oh yeah.
tie-in,
Mhm.
the significance of woad in
No.
Celtic
Yeah.
culture. So that was where I was going with that.
No, it's dope. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I also love the idea that like eventually, right? Like if so what we're talking about is more like the horror aspect, but there's the sequel that becomes more actiony. And in that actiony part, there's going to be a woad-clad hero who, like, as the church is burning, he's like, you see his like his silhouette, and then from that, like, comes the woad and stuff like that. Like, very cinematic, very cool. But for now, we're going with the spooky part of this. But
Right.
Yeah.
obviously, that's what it will eventually happen unless we go real fucking dark with how this ends up going. But I love
never
the
know.
idea of like adding in the woad aspect to it.
Mhm. And it's also like comes up with really interesting visuals too, like the contrast that
Mhm.
you now have between like the blue of the woad and the red of the blood, and how that's going to tie in over time.
Mhm.
And also just imagining, I'm guessing that, we're going to end up with our heroes going down into these catacombs wearing woad, and like picturing that wearing off over time. And,
Of course. Yeah.
what's the danger in like, as it rubs off of you, like how susceptible are you going to be? When is that line crossed where they're going to get taken over?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that because, it's basically a body paint.
Yeah.
I mean, traditionally you would mix it with whiskey to create the pigment that you would paint on. And because the alcohol would dry off quickly and, it would be stuck there. But eventually, if you're going against an entity whose entire identity is blood.
Yeah.
So Courtney,
this is going to be a charnel house. And eventually, if you're not careful, the woad is going to wash off.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was thinking that, like, if you really want to get down at the heart of this thing, it will force you through like dungeon design to wade through blood, or like even like swim through it as an attempt to wear down or wash off the woad in some way. Like if this thing is like a hive mind, hyper intelligent, unknowable consciousness, it's going to be smart enough to realize like we can get that off you. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
So like, actually, the more I think about it, the more like non-conventional some of the attacks and enemies could be, like rather than just stabbing you, like some of it might be preferable actually that they take people alive or like have the equivalent of water balloons to like try and wash, or like a fire hose, I suppose, right? Yeah. Probably more effective than a water balloon. I think I'm too into the Monster Squad aspect of this part, but no. To bring it back to the horror, yeah, there is, I think, a desire that this thing has to grow, and that I mean to get more followers. So like that part is rather interesting as well.
Right.
Yeah, and I can see, because this was explained as being both a body horror and a cosmic horror. And the thing about cosmic horror is that as a theme, humanity is insignificant.
Right. Does not matter. Which means that the entity knows it has adherents. It doesn't care about them. And so things that it would do would be like, it would send, half a dozen of its adherents over to like tackle and pin one of the heroes. And then they would start bloodletting themselves over the person to try and wash and smear off the woad.
That is amazing.
Why not just cover yourself in blood, like your own blood in some cases, and then just like start wrestling them, rubbing your body off on it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because they're a disposable resource to this entity. I mean, it's truly insignificant, the life of these adherents. And so, there's no reason why they wouldn't just dispose of them as the most expeditious way to get what they need done.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that works. And I know that I kind of gave it a funny imagery with like slick wrestling and stuff like that. However, I think that, if we were to use more serious tones, or if you saw this in real life, it'd be fucking terrifying.
Oh yeah, that would be
horrifying.
Yeah.
I wanted to, like, it's spooky season. I want to not take away from the incredibly horrific imagery that we're dealing with here, So yes, agreed on the cosmic horror front, Ian. I think that's a good point to bring up as well, for sure. So let's see. Courtney, you're up next.
Yep.
So Courtney.
So speaking of adherence and how it gets them, I was just trying out a demo of a horror game on Steam called Dead Letter Department. And the gameplay was actually data entry. Like you're at a computer transcribing addresses and notes on pieces of mail that, of course, get like weirder and more disturbing as you go.
Of course. Truly the most horrific of jobs. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. And based on that sort of unassuming source of horror, I want this creature's method of invading your mind, at least initially, to be based on reading or transcribing something. definitely open to ideas, but given that this is a church, I'm thinking it could be like even something as simple as flyers that get handed out, or it's the act of doing some sort of written component of a church service, something like that.
I like the idea, if we're playing with the themes that we have going here so far, I like the idea that there is a level of buy-in required more than just reading something, because you can kind of read something incidentally, right?
Yeah.
I think that, and this actually kind of works a little bit with my tenet. However, I want to talk about yours a little bit more. I think that having these acolytes or these followers like draw or write something is really important. And I think that that's a really interesting way that we can kind of get them in. One of the things that I find particularly interesting is that at that point, right, like people have devoted themselves to this cause in some way. So when the bad shit starts happening, because they've already devoted themselves, because there's been that like buy-in of the required writing, it suddenly becomes much harder. And I know that doesn't sound like much, right? Like the writing doesn't seem that much, but there's a ritual to it. There's the deliberateness to it. There is the choosing to make this part of your life, which means that it makes the buy-in that much more real to these people. So it's far more sinister than just a writing, you know, or reading necessarily, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of like cults in general, they sort of rely on a gradual escalation of devotion.
Exactly.
So I picture that the same here, where, you know, at first you're just attending the services, but eventually you get to the point, and maybe it does seem like completely benign or there's no major like red flags about it, but eventually you are required to transcribe or write something. And that's the point, the like true turning point where you can't really go back from that.
Absolutely.
So how closely are we wanting this to mirror or parallel real world religions? The reason I ask is because my wife is a recovered Catholic, and one of the things about the Catholic Church is First Communion is a big thing. And until you go through all of the steps required to do your First Communion, you're not allowed to take communion.
Right.
So what if the ritual required for the initiation is like that? So where you're gradually building up, you know, you're learning the words and you're learning the motions, and then eventually you are invited to take your first communion, whatever form this is going to take, whether it is actually, you know, consuming a cup that is the blood of the entity, or perhaps, you know, it involves something a little less macabre, a little more innocuous, which is like you prick your finger and you put a drop of blood into the font, and then that you mingle your blood with the entity, and in doing so you give it the conduit in.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I think I have an idea that we can build off of this as well. First of all, blood in the ink and then transcribing it using the bloody ink is probably the best way to physically and metaphorically represent the commingling of like the entity and yourself, right?
Agreed.
Right.
So secondly, here's what I think we can get into, because my wife is also a recovering Catholic. I think what the Catholic Church does well is the idea of spectacle or pomp and circumstance in some cases, right? So I think what we do, right, we have every time there's a new convert, there is a big spectacle about it. So every week, if you're coming to this church every week and you see we've got a new person, and so they're giving their sermon, and then in the background, this person's finishing up their like written ritual. And then you see them become part of this hive mind. You see like this change. And then there's like collective weeping with joy. And like, you know, you make a big deal out of whenever there's a new convert. It's going to be intriguing. And it might seem really horrific to some people, but there's also this idea of like, wow, that person finally did their thing. Good for them. You know, like there's a spectacle to this deal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. And Ian, you'd brought up too, like the idea of practicing towards this, which I like too, like making sure that you're getting the calligraphy exactly
Mhm.
right. So
Oh,
when
yeah.
you do this actual ceremony, you produce this like beautiful, almost illuminated text of a contract, if you will.
Right.
And you kind of present that to everybody. And it's like, yeah, I just love the idea of it being like a graduation almost.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
I can see that, as part of this, obviously they're going to have their first possession as part of this whole
Mhm.
ceremony. It has to be, because that's adding into the horrific thing. This is what you've been working up to, and so finally you get your reward.
Mm.
And I can definitely see this also as a way of disposing of non-believers,
Mhm.
disposing of the skeptics, because we haven't specified what the horrific things they do are,
Mm-hmm.
but I think we can guess.
We can certainly infer. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
There are few things more horrific than taking the life of another human being. And so if
Mm.
there are people who show up and they're like, this isn't for me. No. Once you
Mhm.
step in that door, you're either going to become a convert or you're not going to talk about what we do here.
I think that there's also something to go, like, I want to build on that, but I also want to go back to my point about spectacle. I'm thinking back to some childhood friends whose family members were born again, or they did the ritual again as like sort of like a testament to their faith. So
Right.
it's not just enough to pledge once, but to go back and like
Mhm.
show how serious you are about it. Not because you want to rise in the ranks within the church, it's because you take your faith so seriously. And I think that there's something to that, right? Where someone who has been, maybe they've been wavering since they've been in the church, maybe that they're a little suspicious about this whole body control situation. I think that there's something powerful to the congregation about someone who may have been, feel like they've been wavering in their faith, to come back and say, my crisis of faith is over. I'm back at the church. I'm a stronger believer now more than ever.
Mhm.
Of course, what you don't see is the myriad psychological and physical tortures that they've endured at the hand of the church.
Yeah.
Actually, and to be more specific and horrific about this, not just the hand of the church, but their very own hand. Because as we've said, right, when they're possessed by this entity, they are fully aware, they're fully in control, or they're not in control, but they're fully aware of everything. So imagine that the entity takes over of your own body and tortures yourself with that same body.
Mhm.
Just how much of a psychological breakdown that would feel like. It's just skin crawling horror.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if they force you to mutilate somebody else as like
Oh,
a
yeah.
test of your
That's a good
faith.
one, too. Yeah.
And so, I mean, you're obviously being controlled, but you're doing it. It's your own
Mhm.
body that's committing this atrocity. And you
Right.
have to just watch it happen.
And you think that you have, maybe you there is a little bit of guilt in there as well, where it's like, I could have made the choice not to harm this person, but
Mhm.
or like actively fought yourself to like not harm this other person, something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's real body horror there, and that's like
Oh, yeah.
really fascinating. I think that's a really good point too, Courtney.
Yeah. And then that also brings up, like, again, the pressure of not talking about it, not questioning it after the fact. Or,
Mhm.
like, if you were to question it, then others could blame you. Like, well, you consented to being taken over
Mhm.
by this being. You were the one who came here in the first place. So
Right.
it is on you that you
The
did this.
power of the ritual again
Yeah.
is
Mhm.
far more than just allowing the entity in you. It's also the guilt that it instills in you as you do it. Like the
Yeah.
complicity that you feel in it. That's the important power to it.
And two, it's like, who are you going to go to after something like
Right.
that? Like, if you go to some external authority and are like, I was just forced to, hurt somebody terribly, are they actually going to believe that? Like, it
Mhm.
brings up all these doubts. And because of that doubt of yourself, of, being taken seriously outside, being trusted, you're more likely to just continue as is and not bring it up externally.
Yeah. It's insular. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love it. Man, this is real. This is like so fucked up and fun so far. I'm digging this.
It's very fucked
All
up.
right. So I wanted to jump in earlier, but we had such a good convo going that I'm like, let's keep it moving, because my second tenet is fairly simple, but it's also very symbolic. And I mean that literally, in that I want the symbol of the Triskelion to be the symbol of the church. And what I want to incorporate here is not just the symbol itself, but also what the symbol might represent. And I don't want this to be like there's only one way that we can interpret it. I think that the symbol of the Triskelion is like, it's vague enough where it can mean anything. It's kind of like all right. So before I continue on with my spiel here, you know what we're talking about when I mean the Triskelion, right?
No, I do not.
All right, so the Triskelion is like this ancient kind of symbol that represents like a three-legged man, but the symbolism of it, or like the literal symbology of it, the semiotics of it, is like essentially a triple spiral that's all connected.
Okay.
The image itself is kind of trippy, and I'm sure that we'll probably have like a link to it or something when this goes up. But I looked at this imagery and I'm like, hell yeah, that's dope and kind of trippy and kind of scary, but it's also three spirals that are all interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we can utilize that in a number of ways when we're talking about this cult. So Courtney, when you said that there's like a written component to it,
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking that what you do is you're essentially writing like a contract out, right? Or like the rights of this church out in the symbol of the Triskelion. So like you're writing entire words in this really intricate pattern, which is why it looks so visually striking.
Mm-hmm.
And like it all just, I think it works really well together overall.
That is cool. And of course, I feel like bringing up spirals and horror, we have to reference Junji Ito's Uzumaki.
Of course.
Yeah, which is all
my
about
goodness, yeah.
the horror of spirals. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it.
There is supposed to be an Adult Swim cartoon or anime coming about it.
Really?
It got delayed because of COVID.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that years ago. Huh.
Yeah. It, again, got delayed because of COVID. But one component I really wanted to like focus on a little bit was the music in Uzumaki, the upcoming animated thing, is by the same person who did Hereditary and Color Out of Space. I don't remember his name, but the fucking music is so unsettling and upsetting. I'm like, yes, this is what Uzumaki should have as music. But anyway, yes, spirals and,
Yes.
and Uzumaki, of course. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Tangent over. But yeah, I think that the spiral in horror is a really good thing. And I'm like, hey, if I can have a Celtic version of Uzumaki, that's kind of dope. Like there's a lot of stuff that like lines up as well, I think.
Yeah. And like, then that makes me wonder, like, what does the entity look like? Is it some sort of snail-like creature that has some kind of I don't know. It's like
it's
some
a
element
from OD&D. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. No, I think if we're sticking to our theme of cosmic horror, we don't know what the actual entity looks like.
That's true.
But we may know what some of its like favored creatures might look like or something like that. So there might be a snail-like kind of monstrosity that is involved in the situation. But we might also just want to figure out other cool spiral animals and like or just like maybe actually just a human spiral. Like legs to waist, regular human, torso up, just like a fucking Julianne person, right? And that is somehow you've been shown favor by this thing. And yeah, the imagery is fucking horrifying of like trying to think of that. Like, ugh.
So one of the modern uses of the Triskelion in modern heraldry, one of the other things that I do, I'm in the Society for Creative Anachronism, and I am a herald. So I look at modern heraldry and I make people heraldry for their personas and whatnot.
Oh, dope.
One of the modern uses is the heraldry for the Isle of Man. The Isle of Man is a Triskelion, but the three legs are literal legs It is 3 legs conjoined at the center in the form of a triskelion.
That's pretty horrifying, but that works.
Yeah.
So whenever you start talking about that, that's literally what I see is, whirlwinds of legs.
Oh God. Yeah. Okay, so let's revamp that concept then. So 3 legs, so human torso with 3 legs, and then a Julianne kind of like spiralized person from the waist up. How does that sound? More horrifying? I think so.
Suitably horrifying, yeah. And like,
yeah.
That's just
Jesus
like,
Christ.
What kind of experiments are they performing on people to get that result?
See, I don't think that's, well, actually, you know what? This actually segues nicely into one of my questions, because the setting is pretty implicitly steampunk, and we don't really have much steampunk flavor in this right now.
Right.
So with the idea of experimentation, I think that is a great segue into that question, Courtney. So great job there.
Thanks.
Of course.
I imagine that whatever they're doing is, since they're all mind controlled, both the sort of perpetrators and the victims, like everybody's fully awake and aware while this is happening, even the people who are being experimented upon.
Well, okay, so I have a question about this though. If this thing is so fucking smart, how come it needs to experiment? Shouldn't it know the process of this kind of human reconfiguration, shall we say?
I don't think that it's experimentation on the part of the entity. I think that it is the adherents trying in their limited way to change their form to emulate the entity.
They're trying to curry favor by like representing themselves as something that they recognize as the entity.
Yes.
Right. Okay. That's really good. That totally works for me. Yeah. Okay. Another question, right? We haven't really gotten to the politically important part of the church yet. And one thing that I am very curious, because basically right now, right? And this is my problem with a lot of like D&D-esque churches, right? Sometimes you just have a fucking church of evil assholes. Like, why would a community allow this church to exist and thrive? Why would this particular church be politically important and a place where everyone from all the classes kind of commingle? So essentially what I'm asking is, what good does this church do?
No, that's a great point. And I agree that it would be good to have something kind of externally that they're doing for the benefit of others, whether it's sort of charity work to help others in the city. If it's this Victorian steampunk styled place, I imagine that there's, disparity among the classes, and maybe they kind of help people most in need, give them a home to stay in, that sort of thing.
See, I want to take a cynical approach to this.
You, Ian?
Yeah, I know, right? Right.
Weird.
Because if we treat this the same way that we would treat, say, a megachurch, the church itself doesn't need to provide a service. The service it provides is the status symbol of being a member of the church.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Further question, though. So, yes, that's true. Megachurches rely on the prestige of it, right? But they have a pre-established religion from which they can kind of base their rights and everything on, right? So really all you need is money and someone who's charismatic, and then like someone who knows the Bible, right? Like, there you go. That's how you get it in. But with this church, like, what are the, like, foundationally, what makes it appealing to followers? Because that's the thing. That's the thing that we've got. Because, like, I agree with you. Structurally, once you get to a point that's big enough, it really doesn't matter very much about what you do for the community. But how did it get to that point to begin with? And I think that by approaching it that way, we also add a level of nuance to the church where there's plausible deniability. Like, you would want to be part of this church as a result, right?
Right.
And I can definitely see that it once had that purpose, and that as it has gained in membership and as it has grown in congregation, the outreach portions of it have become less important than the status of being a member. But what the initial outreach would have been, I don't know.
Just sort of thinking about like a breakdown of what this church embodies, and I'm getting the sense that there's a lot around like transformation and also giving up control so that others may help you in a way. So I'm wondering if it's like they started out as trying to help the more impoverished, like take charge of their own lives, if you will, or started, not sure how to phrase it, but just something about like transforming to give more opportunities and that these people might otherwise not have originally.
Did this start as an addiction self-help group?
That's
like an AA sort of entity.
I like
you
that.
You don't have to go it alone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. That's really cool.
That works. That absolutely works.
And that's like absolutely targeting like some of the most vulnerable people who are trying
because
to get help.
These are desperate people who are
literally
willing to try anything to wrest control of their lives.
I mean, you can frame it as well as this kind of like, look who I used to be and look who I am now. I'm like this owner, and because everyone loves a good redemption story, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that absolutely works. That fits very well. And also, I think it fits in with this idea that is a mingling spot for all of the classes, because all classes are affected by substance abuse, right? And you can kind of like have an intermingling, and like rich people can take them to this church and be like, fix our son. He's broken.
Yeah.
And then he comes back. He's like, actually that's kind of a part of how AA works in some cases, right? Believing in a higher power. I mean,
and it also incorporates a basis for a 10-step program.
And going through the phases.
At the end of which you have your initiation.
That's interesting. That is, I like what we've done with this, and I think, holy shit, it works pretty goddamn well. So I think we're at the point where we can probably do a tenet recap and check in and make sure that we're at the place that we need to be. So Ian, what was your first tenet? Remind us.
My first tenet was that the blood fountains are the physical manifestations of the cosmic entity in our world.
We've almost forgotten about the blood fountains. That's a good thing. Courtney, what was your follow-up tenet to that?
Mine was also blood-oriented, taking from Irish mythology that in the past this entity had been wounded in some way, and the blood that was spilled formed an underground lake. That's the source of the blood fountains.
Question. I just realized, because we're doing existential horror, right? Okay. Is this the blood? Because I'm bucking against this idea that the blood itself is the blood of this entity. I don't like that concept. I think it'd be more interesting if this was the blood of a god that it fought, and its presence is so fucking horrible that it has instilled its presence in the blood of a divine being, because that adds an extra layer of like plausible deniability. Because if you look at that blood from like a good cleric's perspective, you can look at it and be like, no, that's divine blood. That's good blood.
Well, what if this entity was originally a god in itself? And
see, I want to take that away even further, because I don't want to know what this thing is. I don't want to define it.
Well, we don't really need to define it. I'm just wary of like going against the tenet that I introduced.
Because I like the concept that you're going with, Rob, because, gods are by and large creations of humanity. They are a construct of the communal consciousness. Belief brings them into existence, and this entity exists outside of that existence.
Right.
And so I like that concept of, there was this god, it was a protector of whatever region or people or what have you, and this entity shows up and ganks it.
Right. And so, Courtney, I want to go back to your point as well, because I don't want to like trample on your tenet here, right? But I would like to bring up the classic movie Predator, wherein the quote is, "If it bleeds, we can kill it." right?
Yeah.
So I think that by having the blood be that of the entity itself, it makes it less scary because we now know that it can be hurt, right? However, I'm willing to concede that if you don't want this, if you want it to be the entity's blood, I'm totally down with that. I'm not dying on that hill. I just want to point out that thematically, if we're staying with cosmic horror, it might make more sense to have that blood be something else and just have the presence of it be in there. But like I said, I'm not here to fight about that.
It could be like a mixed sort of blood, I guess, from both beings, maybe. And I also want to make sure that we get Ian's in there too, that the blood fountains are like how it sort of operates, essentially.
Yeah, no, I don't, but I don't think that my suggestion here kind of tramples on that. I don't think it negates that.
Yeah, because my tenet was that the fountains are the entity, not necessarily the blood within them. So
that's interesting.
Okay.
So Courtney, I want to make sure that you're okay with this though, because like I want to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're all excited about this. And again, I don't want to steal thunder from your tenet.
Yeah. No, I'm just trying to think of a way to compromise there.
So I suppose my question becomes, why does it being the blood of the entity matter so much in this particular case? Because if you are drawing from religion, like the Celtic mythology, like Baelor, then like it being the blood of something that's been spilled, that works. Like if we can make it a god, if we can essentially make it a Baelor equivalent, but the thing that gouged out his eye is now influenced, it's like commingled in its blood through its essence, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was getting at, right? Does that work? Or like, is there something about the physical blood of this entity that you are really adamant about keeping?
I mean, part of what also interested me about that is the idea that maybe it's been healing over time and that's why it's gaining strength. Like it was wounded, millennia ago, and over time it's healed. And that's why it's like become such a core part of recent history in the city.
Okay.
So gotcha. I have an idea because we have sort of established that by sacrificing your own blood to the entity allows the entity to gain control. If this is a god that the entity has killed or has maimed and wounded, what if the entity is trying to assert control over the god through the blood, and that as it brings in adherents, as it brings in followers, that power of faith reinforces this corrupted worship of the god, and it, because gods operate off of faith, the god becomes stronger as they gain more adherents, but it's this corrupted aspect of it that is subservient to the entity.
Interesting. This also gives me a visual image that I think I'm okay with going in the direction of, which is like that the god whose blood was spilled is still there. It's still alive, like you were saying, but it's this entity is like constantly feeding off of it.
Yeah, I'm totally cool with that.
Yeah, which is like
100%
disturbing. And
so it is healing, but it's also like healing in the wrong way. And I'll tell you, Ian, the reason that was so effective, you used the word corrupt and corruption, and Courtney was immediately like got her fan out and was like cooling herself down. She's like, oh, you hit the magic words. I think that, and I agree though. I agree with Courtney that the imagery is really striking. And again, is like this dark thing that's secretly feeding on a healing god is like fucking cool and really good. I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Yep. Amazing. Right. Excellent.
I'm definitely cool with this now.
Okay, good. Again, you just got to toss in corruption and then you're good.
Oh yeah, totally fine. No.
Because imagine the existential horror of finding out that you're adhering to the worship of this god, and you go through jump through all of the hoops, and you find out that your god isn't who you think it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
That god ain't right. I'll tell you what. All right. So we got the blood tenets out of the way. I wanted to make sure that we only focused on the church, that the church was politically important, and that it allowed for commingling of everyone. I feel like we've done a good job of doing that so far. especially when we brought in the recovery part. I thought that was really good. I mean, shit, we could even make this a god of healing if we really wanted to, right? To really nail down the horror of it.
Healing or redemption.
Sure. Por qué no los dos,
yeah.
right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay, that works. Ian, what was your second tenet?
My second tenet was that wearing woad makes the wearer invulnerable to the mind control abilities of the entity.
I think that we've done a good job talking about that. I also feel like we could probably do a little bit more. However, I feel like that's something that will probably come up better next time.
I think so. Yeah, that is something to flesh out as to why someone in woad would be there in the first place.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. And Courtney, your second tenet.
That was that the initial method of the entity gaining control was through a reading or transcribing of something. And we definitely fleshed that out.
Nailed the hell out of that.
The
Absolutely.
ceremony of writing down this thing.
100%. Yes. And then my final tenet was just the symbol of the Triskelion, which we've done remarkably well, I think. Nightmare fuel, for sure, based on some of the stuff we've done. Yep. Yeah. So I think that do we have any other questions about the setting before we roll for the twist?
Not really. No, I don't think so.
No, yeah, I don't think so.
I similarly feel as though we've nailed it. So yeah, let's go ahead and remember we've got spooky twists this time.
Yes.
Yep. So they're different from our regular twists. And the spooky twist this time is, okay, I don't know how this is going to work, but someone has been dead the whole time. Good old fun horror trope that, comes up a couple times. And one thing that I think we should also do here, because we're not going to have factions with this particular setting, right? So I think what we need to do is roll for a type of person that we're going to be focusing on, that we're going to bring. I think that'd be a really fun thing to do. What do you think?
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I like that. Especially since we're trying to keep like a small scope to this.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So actually, you know what? Do you want to roll for your particular character that you're going to bring?
Yeah, that sounds like a whole lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Sure.
So you roll the dice and tell me what you get. And then I will tell you the thing that you're going to bring in.
All right. What?
A D10. I need a D10 from y'all.
Okay.
Ian?
I have a 7.
You have a skeptic, Ian.
Ooh.
I think that's appropriate considering your woad that you brought in. So yeah. Okay, Courtney?
I got a 4.
You have a villain, Courtney, which again,
excellent. That's great. That's
very appropriate. Yes. And now for my role. Okay, that's a fun one. I have a friend group.
Wow.
So yeah, I think that's fun. I think I have a good idea for that. And yeah. All right. So again, the twist was someone has been dead the whole time, of course. And with that, with the twist and the rolls out of the way, we will see you next time on Worldbuild with us. Remember that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, click the link, follow the instructions, all that good stuff in within a reasonable amount of time. After spooky season's over, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, you can do so by going to @Let'sWorldBuild on twitter.com. You can come join our Discord and talk about spooky stuff or whatever you damn well please. Shout out to the Discord as well. We just added forums where you can now introduce your setting and post a whole bunch of stuff. It's a lot cleaner. It's a much nicer experience overall. So if you haven't been to the Discord in a while, come on through and take a look at it. It's quite cool. And of course, thank you so very much to all of our patrons, especially for this episode in particular. It's been a hell of a whole lot of fun getting these ideas and just breathing life into them. So if you want to be particularly generous and give us money over on Patreon, where you can get access to our patron-only Discord, you can do that. You can also get access to a patron-only episode. And of course, you can always get early episodes if you want to listen to them on Patreon. So big thank you about that all over again. Just follow the link in the description for the Patreon. And with all of that out of the way, that's going to do it for this episode of World Build with us. Remember that we love you very much. We're going to get through this together. Until next week.